To speak of Diego Rivera is to speak of the history of art. Here is a man who embraced every style, from realism to cubism, from impressionism to symbolism. A man who rescued the fresco technique that had been forgotten for centuries and created art so powerful that it changed the way Mexico looked at itself and the way Mexico is seen throughout the world. Here is a portrait that his friend Modigliani created of Diego Rivera. Diego could be violent and rude, but he also had the tenderness of a child. This is a portrait that his first wife, Russian artist Angelina Belov, made of him. He was over 6 feet tall. He weighed more than 300 pounds. And yet, his intelligence was such, and his charm was such, that he seduced some of the most beautiful women of the world, and he befriended men like Picasso, Ford, and Leon Trotsky. This is a portrait his third wife, Frida Kahlo, did of him. Bertrand Wolff once remarked that only love could produce such a portrait of Diego Rivera. This is a portrait, Ramón Gómez de la Serna describes Diego as a living Buddha, with that sumptuous fatness of Buddha. Other chroniclers describe Diego's laughter as unforgettable, a laugh that could be heard and would resonate in your mind forever. Diego's capacity for work was unbelievable. He could work 16 hours or more, and it is believed that if you were to put all of his paintings and murals together, they would occupy a surface of approximately 3 square kilometers. He had a powerful imagination, and he could tell you the most incredible stories. He could call a press conference to invent a new theory, and he could throw everybody into confusion. He just thought of it right there. You know, he could discuss everything. And some of it is myth, other is reality. Siqueiros used to say that the good thing about Diego Rivera is that he would never tell you a 100% lie. And yet, what Diego Rivera pursued with his stories, with his magnificent art, was the ability to create a new reality. Because Diego Rivera could not just paint the world, but invent a world of his own. Diego Rivera was born in Guanajuato. And if any of you have not been in Guanajuato, you don't know what you're missing. It is the most romantic place on earth. There are streets in Guanajuato that are so narrow that when you walk through them, you can kiss a person from one side of the street to the other. And if you pass there and you don't kiss whatever is next to you, you have several years of bad fortune. So here you see the home of Diego Rivera. His parents, the family of Diego Rivera is very distinguished. His father was a distinguished professor, a man who had fought in the Battle of Cinco de Mayo, who had collaborated against the French invaders of the country. He was also a man of deep democratic ideals who published a newspaper, who defended the miners, and who was often punished because of his political convictions. At one point, he was expelled of Guanajuato. And his mother had had several miscarriages, so it was a especially happy occasion that night, the 8th of December of 1886, when they would give birth to twins. Carlos, the younger twin, would die 2 years later. The other one would become a world-famous artist. He would be baptized as Diego María de la Concepción Juan Nepomuceno Estanislao de la Rivera Costa y Rodríguez, and I think I'm missing some names, better known as Diego Rivera. And believe it or not, Diego Rivera created his first scandal when he was only 3 years old. His aunt Vicenta Totota took him to church, and when they saw the image of the Virgin, she told him, "Look, Dieguito, kneel and pray to the Virgin. And ask her for good things for your mommy and your daddy." And Diego says, "I'm not going to do that." "Why, Dieguito?" "Because she cannot hear me. She has no holes in her ears. Está hecha de palo." So the aunt trying to get away with it, "Look, this is an image of the Virgin high above, so anything that you ask the image, the good Virgin will give you." But they said, "But that's absurd. That is like if I asked a photograph of my father for my allowance." What is remarkable is that you can see how very, very early in his life, Diego has this incredible intelligence and this ability of observation and of thinking logically through what he observes. Very early on, he discovered an artistic vocation. He used to draw everywhere, on the furniture. They had at one point to cover the place with paper. And very early, very soon in his life, Diego Rivera was admitted to the prestigious school of San Carlos. In San Carlos, he had several important teachers. José María Velasco, that taught him the laws of perspective, and taught him to love the land of Mexico. He also had Félix Parra, that taught Diego to love pre-Hispanic art, and Santiago Rebull. Santiago once invited Diego to his studio, and he told him, "These things we call paintings are attempts to capture on a flat surface the perpetual motion of life. A painting should contain the possibility of perpetual motion. If it's not alive, if it doesn't move, it is not a good painting." And Diego studied. The governor of Guanajuato, because of the political enmity with his father, did not give him a scholarship. But the governor of Veracruz, Teodoro de Esa, did. And with that offer, and some introductory letters written by another great Mexican artist, Gerardo Murillo, El Doctor Ato, Diego Rivera was able to travel to Spain, where he arrived the 6th of January of 1907. He was 21 years old. And here in Spain, he joined the workshop of Eduardo Chicharro. But there is something new now, and that is that he could visit the Museum of El Prado, and he would encounter directly the works of Rubens and Velázquez and Goya, and he would try to decipher their secrets and to understand not just the color, the drawing, and the composition, but the chemistry of these works and how were they done. It is a time of intense study and frustration. Sometimes he worked for hours trying to get a certain tone or a certain quality. And if he could not achieve it, he would hit his head against the walls of the studios. One day, the great Mexican Spanish artist Joaquín Sorolla entered the studio. And he looked at the paintings that were there and he said, "Who is the author of this painting?" And he said, "Me." He said, "Let me look at your hand." He said, "You know what you have here? In this finger you have a checkbook of pounds. Here you have a checkbook of dollars. Here you have a checkbook of marks. You'll be the greatest artist of your generation." Diego was dead broke at the time. But he was so excited by the predictions of Sorolla that he gambled whatever he had in a poker game, and Diego says he won. And with that money, he set out to visit the rest of Europe. He goes to France, he goes to Belgium, he goes to Holland, he goes to England. And in these trips, he meets a very beautiful woman, Angelina Belov, a Russian artist that he would paint here. This is the photograph, and here you see Diego's painting. Diego would describe Angelina as this great, beautiful, unbelievably decent woman who had the terrible misfortune of meeting me. Here you have some of the examples of the paintings of the time. I wanted you to see the photograph and then to show you the magnificent work that Diego Rivera does of that same space. With Angelina, Diego establishes himself in Montparnasse in Paris. And here he knows an even broader array of paintings. Diego would say that the only way one can eliminate an influence, in other words, whenever you feel that you're being influenced by somebody, Diego said, you must embrace that influence. Because only when you've tried in your work the style of others can you find and separate your own voice. And so during these years, you see in many of these works how Diego works in many traditions, clearly like the Dutch tradition, or the works of Seurat and Signac, or clearly the style of Greco in works like these. This is what many consider Diego Rivera's first masterpiece. Guadalupe Rivera describes how she lived with this wonderful work in which you see the influence of Greco, but you also begin to see a different influence, which is the emergence of Cubism. Because Diego Rivera is always changing, is always transforming his art. He's influenced by Cubism, but also by Futurism and the idea of capturing motion and movement. This work, The Young Woman of the Alcachofas, así, algo así, ¿no? Alcachofas. Brought Diego some early fame with the critics. And more, he becomes close to Picasso and to Gris and to others. And you see how his work becomes cubist. Now, it is important to analyze and to realize that Cubism permits Diego to fully explore and understand space, and to see something from many different perspectives. Look at this image of a bull ring. If it were a conventional painting, it would simply be one perspective. But because he is working in the Cubist tradition, he can show you a close-up, the place from above, from below. In other words, he can show you many perspectives. And the same is true about portraiture. In some works, like this portrait of Adolfo Béz Nogar, what Diego Rivera pursues is what he calls la cifra facial. In other words, to find those essential traits that make a face recognizable. In others, like this portrait of Ramón Gómez de la Serna, he presents not just the subject, but also what that person is thinking, what he's writing. He presents him smoking his pipe and does los tres movimientos de la pipa, and then also what he's thinking, the subject of his book. It must be said that when this painting was exhibited, there was a riot outside of the gallery, people attacking the gallery with stones. They had to bring the police, and it's so explosive was this new aesthetic that was being promoted by Diego Rivera. And yet, Diego refuses to conform to even the cubist laws and starts changing it and introducing colors and looking for different things. And this leads to a clash with the cubists. In many ways, Diego Rivera is at the head of the cubist movement. At one point, for instance, he discovers a way of painting trees. And once he visits Picasso, and he sees that Picasso has done exactly the same thing that he has done. And so Picasso says, oh yes, I did this painting a long time ago. And Diego agarra and touches, and he sees that it's fresh, the paint is fresh. He says, oh yes, you did it a long time ago. Eventually, he would fight with the Cubists. Diego Rivera was this huge man, and they referred to him as the Cannibal. He went with this big bastón, a bachón, para orientar a la crítica, to orient the critic. He could not stand the Parisian snobs. At one point with the critic Pierre Reverdy, the conflict got to physical blows, and as a result of this, he was ostracized from the French critic. This is perhaps his most famous Cubist work. It's called Paisaje Zapatista, and we can see how Diego Rivera is already using symbols and icons that connect him to Mexico. My favorite series of Cubist works are these three portraits he does of Angelina Beloff. First, you see her getting pregnant, and you see how everything converges into her belly. And then, when the child is finally born, notice how, without using any cliche, Diego gives us all the relationship between the mother and her son. Unfortunately, the winter of 1916 is particularly difficult. Diego has lost his scholarship. He's not selling almost anything. And their little son gets sick. Diego would say in his memoirs that he would die of cold, that they were so poor that they could not even afford to heat their tiny apartment. And as a result of the death of his son, and also out of this feeling that his art was not transcending the way he wanted it to, Diego enters into a period of profound depression. One day, when coming out of the gallery, he sees a cart full of peaches. And Diego is so excited that he pulls Angelina and says, mira qué hermosos estos duraznos. He says he found that those peaches were much more beautiful than anything that he had seen inside of the gallery. And that same night he began tearing himself out of Cubism, and through the admiration of Cézanne, to discover a new style of work. Now, it is in this period when Diego Rivera would meet a man that would change his life. This man would be Élie Forêt. Élie Forêt had been a doctor in the trenches of World War I. And as you know, World War I is a protracted conflict in which the soldiers could spend years in rat-infested trenches with rats and chemical weapons. And so Forêt had a humanist vision that was completely different than the critics in Paris. And he tells Diego, el artista es el producto y la expresión de su tiempo. The artist is the product and the expression of his time. El arte es el llamado al instinto de comunión entre los hombres. Art is the calling of the instinct of communion among people. And he says, you should feel in your art the pain of others. In your veins, the pain and the life of the people should circulate. You must paint for the people. And so Diego Rivera says, but how can I do that? And Ford says, go to Italy, see the frescoes of the Renaissance. And with the assistance of Minister Pani and José Vasconcelos, he's able to travel to Italy, and for the next 18 months, he sees all the frescoes of the Renaissance. And he completes more than 300 drawings. He masters the secrets of Michelangelo, of Giotto, of Masaccio. And finally, after a long visit, he feels that he is ready to come home. He would arrive to Mexico in 1922. And the re-encounter of Diego Rivera with Mexico is one of the most beautiful and the most memorable moments in the history of Mexican art. Many years later, he would create this painting, Rio de Juchitán, at the end of his career, in which he would remember that luminous moment when he came back home. He would write, "Mi regreso a casa me produjo un júbilo estético imposible de describir. Fue como si hubiese vuelto a nacer, nacido a un mundo nuevo. My homecoming produced an aesthetic exhilaration which is impossible to describe. It was as if I were born anew, born into a new world. In everything I saw a potential masterpiece. The crowds, the markets, the festivals, the marching battalions, the working men in the shops and fields, in every glowing face, in every luminous child, all was revealed to me. I had the conviction that if I lived 100 lives, I could not exhaust even a fraction of this state of buoyant beauty." And now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a brief intermission, and we're going to return to share with you the beautiful murals that Diego Rivera would produce in Mexico. And the reason we're doing this intermission is so that you can have the opportunity of buying tickets for the next show of Tamayo. We have tables out there, and today, only today, the $30 tickets, you can get them for $20. And we have this incredible video developed by Lux, in which you will see the incredible experience of Tamayo. So please buy your tickets, fill your cards, get a drink, and we'll be back in 15 minutes to see the rest of the murals of Diego Rivera. Muchas gracias. In 1910, on the 20th of November, precisely in the moment when Diego Rivera was opening an exhibit in Mexico, attended by the wife of Porfirio Díaz, in Puebla, the revolution had begun. And during the next decade, Mexico would be under a very intense transformation. It is important to understand that the Mexican Revolution is not only a civil war, is not only a change of government, but more profoundly, the revolution, as Carlos Fuentes has said, is also a revelation of Mexico to itself. During the long dictatorship of Porfirio Díaz, the vast majority of Mexico not only lived in conditions of oppression, but in conditions of immobility. Las haciendas had what they call la tienda de raya, that tied the peasants to that hacienda, because the debt of one generation was passed to the next. And so the people could not leave the hacienda for generations. But suddenly, the Mexican Revolution breaks the chains of feudalism, and the Mexicans of the north go to the south, of the east go to the west. The revolution is also a great cultural encounter, an encounter of music, an encounter of ways of looking at the world, of ways of cooking. Every aspect of Mexico is shaken and moved and exchanged. And the mobility that this generates and the transformations that this occur produce a different nation. Perhaps the man most responsible of transforming this revolutionary ideal, this new reality into a cultural reality, is José Vasconcelos. Vasconcelos understand what we often forget. There is a profound sadness in the education as practiced today because art is separated from education. Art is what gives education meaning. How can somebody understand a period if he does not understand the art of that period or the literature of that period? So Vasconcelos understands this, and he becomes first the head of the university and then the first modern secretary of education. And he creates literally a renaissance in the country. Thousands of schools are built. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of young men and women are dispatched to the farthest corners of the country to teach people to read and to write. And also, he understands that art plays a vital role in reviving the conscience of the people. And so he commissions murals to be created in all of these new schools and public buildings and hospitals and libraries that suddenly become full of light and color. Here you have a small example. The person must be maybe this height. Look at the size of this mural. And Diego Rivera, who had traveled to Italy under the auspices of Vasconcelos, returns, and his first commission in the Escuela Nacional Preparatoria, in the auditorium of that school, is still a mural that is very much influenced by what he had seen in Europe. Even though this mural has extraordinary quality, but Vasconcelos was not satisfied, and so he sends Diego Rivera to El Istmo de Tehuantepec. He arranges, President Obregón gives Diego Rivera a pass so that he can circulate throughout the country. And it is in this period where Diego Rivera meets a new woman, Guadalupe Marín, this extraordinarily beautiful woman from Jalisco, a tall, magnificent presence. And she meets him, and Diego sees her eating these oranges. And she has this kind of force about her, this enormous presence. He falls in love with her, and he marries her by the church. Se casan por la iglesia. And with Guadalupe, he would have two daughters. Guadalupe, that is with us, that Diego Rivera called Pico, and Ruth, that he called Chapo. And it is in this period when Diego Rivera does what many consider his masterpiece in Chapingo. You must not die without having gone to Chapingo. No se puede morir sin haber visitado los frescos de Chapingo. Nobody has described the murals of Chapingo better to me than Guadalupe Rivera in her book, un río, dos riveras. She gives us all the drama behind the mural. But what we see in this magnificent creation is this complete environment in which Diego explores the cultivation of the land and the liberation of those who work the land. The dominant figure is precisely the image of Guadalupe Marin as the pregnant earth. And then he compares the cycle, these are front to front. First you see germination, these figures that are about to be born. And in front of it you see this worker that is dispersing the seeds, that is planting the seeds. Then you see floration and the sacrifice of the leader. And then you see fructification. And you see the fruit and the victory of the revolution. So masterful is Chapingo that when you look at the ceilings, they seem to be sculptures, parecen esculturas de la perfección del dibujo. They seem to be in third dimension. At the same time, Diego Rivera was embarking in a difficult mural in Palacio Nacional. Now, this mural is not flat, as I'm going to present it to you. It is a stairs. So as you walk through that stair, it is as if you were enveloped in the history of Mexico. This mural is very advanced in its conception because it's not linear, but it's environmental. Here you see the arrival of the Spaniards, and you see the figure of Quetzalcoatl. Then you see the conquistadores and the war of conquest. You see the oppression, the establishment of the church, the Inquisition, the burning of the codexes. Then you see Mexico's attempts against the French and the Americans and its efforts of revolution and independence. And in the last part of the mural that he would complete after his return to the US, you see a fresco that is called Mexico of Today and Tomorrow. It presents a Mexico in conflict, a Mexico in strikes and in difficulty. Diego would also work in the building of the Ministry of Education. It would take him several years to complete this cycle, more than 124 frescoes. And in one patio, it has to do with all of labor. And in these frescoes, originally Vasconcelos had told him that he wanted him to paint the women of the different states in their costume. But Diego realized that he could not paint the people without the landscape. And then he realized that he could not do the landscape if he did not do the ideals of them too. So for instance, in this fresco, you see the allegiance of the worker and the peasant. Or here, you see a little bit what I was talking about, this wonderful effort to build schools, to reinvent the nation. And you see the process of the building of the schools, and at the same time, you see the teacher, la maestra, revealing knowledge to the young people. You will also see in images like these, here you see the figure of Tina Modotti and Frida Kahlo. Frida Kahlo was a much younger artist than Diego Rivera. He had, there's different versions of how they met. Most agree that they met in the house of Tina Modotti, and that Tina, who had seen Diego work in La Escuela Nacional Preparatoria when she was a teenager, she had had this terrible accident that she did some work, and she wanted Diego to give her an opinion. So she starts asking him for his opinion, and eventually they get married. Frida's mother was a bit disappointed. She said that this was like the marriage between an elephant and a dove, she would say. They live a bit in Mexico City, then they travel to Cuernavaca, where Diego does his murals in Palacio de Cortés, and then to the US. They live a good amount of time in San Francisco. This is a portrait that Frida does of the couple at the time. And in San Francisco, he paints several murals at the Stock Exchange. He creates California, inspired in tennis player Helen Wills Moody. Then he does this magnificent mural in the San Francisco Art Institute. It is called The Making of a Fresco. And all of these people that you see are real people. They're all working. It's difficult. Can you imagine how you can paint somebody from behind? And it was a magnificent, you see the painting of the mural, the building of the building. It's like an infinite mural. And yet, a lot of people were offended because they said that what Diego's real intention is to give his big behind to the American public, they said. Then Diego would have a very successful one-man show at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and he would go to his next commission in Detroit. This commission by Ford would give him a full patio. And it is here in Detroit where Diego Rivera would celebrate the great industrial culture of America, a culture that is now deeply threatened. And Diego would create in these murals the entire making of a car. I have given full lectures only with this mural fresco. You see every part, from the metals that are being melted, all the parts that are formed, the assembly lines, every single part. Diego Rivera would say that the greatest compliment of his work he had received in his career was when all the workers and the engineers saw the mural and did not find a single mistake. There was some controversy because one of the panels dedicated to the pharmaceutical industry was accused by the local priest of being sacrilegious. It was, according to this man, a depiction of the Holy Family. And so there was some scandal. But Ford stood by the mural, and the mural is saved. And today, if you go to Detroit, you can see this celebration of American culture, because Diego Rivera sees the humanism in the machine and the hope in the machine, something that a lot of his contemporary American artists did not see. Unfortunately, Diego Rivera was not so lucky in his next mural commission, this time in New York. The theme of the work was man at the crossroads, looking towards a new and better future. So Diego had, this is a photograph that was taken of this mural, one of the few surviving images that we have. And what troubled Rockefeller was this image of Russian revolutionary Leon Trotsky. Not Leon Trotsky, Lenin, perdón. Burro. Rockefeller, was upset. No, he said, "Why are you painting Lenin? You didn't put him in the sketch." And Diego said, "I did, but he was wearing a cap. He didn't notice." What happened was that Rockefeller demands that Diego remove the portrait of Lenin, and Diego refuses. So they send the National Guard, they liquidate him, and then they cover the mural, and eventually the mural is destroyed by hammering on its surface. Nothing remains of this mural. My dream is to someday go to New York with a 12,000 lumen projector and put in that place the forbidden mural of Diego Rivera. about to show you that mural that is now in el Palacio de Bellas Artes in Mexico. We redid it in Bellas Artes. It is, under any standard, a masterpiece. At the center, he puts this worker in control of the universe. Then you have these two ellipses. Here is everything that you can see through the telescope, and here's everything that you can see through the microscope. Here you have the main elements of technology, and here you have the main agricultural products. No? Here is the wealthy, the revolutionary, and the poor, the decapitated statues that represent scholastic thought, no? The Darwin's theory of evolution. It is a magnificent creation in everything, in its color and its composition. If the mural were abstract, if it were only color, it still would be extraordinary. So here you have it, the forbidden mural of Diego Rivera. Then Diego would return to Mexico, and this time he would go after Mexican politicians. He would do this mural, and he puts a general that is stealing the fruit of Miss Mexico, el general Marrano robándole la fruta a Miss Mexico. So this was a series of frescoes that were highly controversial. And so for the next few years, his mural production diminished, and Diego worked intensely in his masterful easel works. Some of these paintings are so beautiful that they have become synonymous with Mexico. I find myself closing my eyes and thinking of Mexico, and what comes is an image very similar to one that Diego Rivera would have painted. Sometimes I go to markets and I find tiny clay figures that recreate a painting by Diego Rivera. I don't know of any other artist in the world whose work has become a common language of the people. Conozco a ningún otro artista cuyo trabajo se ha vuelto parte de la expresión colectiva del país. Pero también, you must see the mastery. Diego Rivera is a genius, es un genio, and a man of infinite resources. Notice how, for example, vean cómo maneja la luz, how he handles the light in this work. Or this masterpiece, esta obra maestra, también a portrait of Guadalupe Marín. And notice the magnificent use of diagonal lines, and how Diego Rivera sometimes takes, in this case, like the hands, and gives you an entire personality with focusing on one aspect. In other occasions, he slightly changes the figure. Picasso used to say, se miente más de la cuenta por falta de fantasía. También la verdad se inventa. We lie too much for lack of fantasy. Truth is also invented. You see these horrible, hyper-realistic works, they insist on putting every pimple, no? Horrible, no? With no talent at all, just kind of crude depiction. Notice how Diego sometimes changes the figures and reveals us not just the exterior of somebody, but their personality and their character. Diego is particularly famous for his paintings of children. Vean ustedes la niña Lupita Cruz. And Rivera would say that once they asked him which was his greatest contribution, and he said, look, in the past, paintings and murals were dedicated to paint the wealthy, the powerful, and the rich. But we placed in the murals and the paintings the peasants and the workers of Mexico. That is our glory. Now, for a man as incredibly productive as Diego, it amazes me that he had time to have also a very active political life. And he was actually part of the international political scene. Through the intervention of Diego Rivera with President Lázaro Cárdenas, Leon Trotsky, the great rival of Stalin, was granted asylum in Mexico. And Trotsky stayed for a while in the house of Diego and Frida. After that, he moved and he eventually was assassinated. Frida and Diego returned to the US, and again in San Francisco, he does his last mural. In this mural, he would present the best of the North and the South. The center is this kind of machine and also a sculpture. And then you see the artisans of North America, the heroes of the US and Mexico, all this combination, this Pan-American unity. Here in this mural, I read a quote by Diego Rivera that impressed me very much, and I would like to share it with you. It says, "I do not know what is good art and what is bad. Every painting is but a means of releasing emotion. The same emotion that is at the base of love, of hate, of everything. That is art for the artist. For the viewer, it is a mirror in which he sees or does not see his own emotions that might be very different from those of the artist. Therefore, painting is either an adequate or an inadequate vehicle for the transmission of emotion." Ahí nada más. Ahora, Diego Rivera deja toda su fortuna no para construirse un museo a sí mismo, sino para celebrar las grandes culturas prehispánicas. Diego invests his fortune and becomes the first Mexican to create a pyramid. Es el primer mexicano que hace una pirámide, 500 años, la Nahuacali. Not for his own work, but to celebrate the art, the pre-Hispanic art. And it is said that one day somebody told him, "Oye, pero pues hay muchos, there's a lot of false pieces, hay muchos falsos." He said, "Look, las mismas manos, the same hands, el mismo barro, the same clay, only a few years in between." And he would be very interested in painting the great pre-Hispanic civilizations. He would do this also in Palacio Nacional, in which he would imagine the great city of Tenochtitlan. And in this vastly beautiful mural, in which he presents los canales, the commerce, the tianguis, the pyramids, this imaginary world, this recreation of Mexico. I must say that Diego pinta la historia de México. It amazes me, the culture of this man, his understanding of everything, of technology, of science, of history, his ability to give visual expression to history, to myth, and to reality. Diego is also a master of medicine, a master of creating murals of medicine. And in el Hospital de la Raza, he would do this mural in which he would put all the modern medicine and the ancient medicine. And again, pueden dar una conferencia sobre este mural, and you can see every procedure. Todo está fundamentado, everything is studied, everything is clear. You can see the connection of these two trees of blood, all the elements. The whole conception of this mural has a powerful scientific validity. He would also, at the end of his life, attempt to, in a way, challenge the elements. In la cuenca del río Lerma, he would try to develop a mural that would be underwater. And in this mural, he would paint all the microscopic world, all the world of the plants and the cells, and the races coming together. Sadly, when the water came, it took away the mural. Now it has been restored, but Diego was not able to create a painting that could sustain the permanent presence of water. Outside of that, he did this tribute to Tlaloc, and he started experimenting with mosaics and the idea now of challenging the sun, of creating murals that could withstand the direct contact of sunlight. He would do that in the Estadio Olímpico Universitario and famously in el Teatro de los Insurgentes. In this, one of his final murals, he uses mosaic technique and he does this mask of theater. Here you see the figure of Cantinflas as a modern Robin Hood that is taking money from the wealthy and giving it to the poor. He would put heroes like Juárez, like Morelos, like Hidalgo, Maximilian, Carlota, the performers, the dancers, as if to say that life, history, and politics is in a way a form of theater. Frida would become very ill in the mid-50s. Her condition deteriorates. Eventually they have to amputate one of her legs. And in 1954, after the US intervention in Guatemala to depose President Jacobo Arbenz, el presidente Arbenz estaba negociando mejores condiciones, better conditions for the Guatemalan people, better prices for the fruit, against the interests of the United Fruit Company that mobilizes the CIA and attack and destroy the government of Arbenz. And so Frida and Diego are furious, and Frida wants to protest and denounce the US intervention. And so she asks Diego to take her in this rally with this big banner that has a dove and the legend Por la Paz. Unfortunately, this would be the last time that Frida would be seen alive. She died a few days later in 1954. It is said that Diego became an old man almost overnight, that he closed his hands so tightly that the hands bled. And a year later, he himself was diagnosed with cancer, tried to cure himself in the Soviet Union, but his condition deteriorated. And the last works that he would do are a beautiful series of sunsets that he would complete in Acapulco. And it is as if his own life and that of his paintings came together. He would die in 1957. And like Frida Kahlo, his last painting was one of watermelons, full of the seeds of a new life. The last mural I would like to share with you is not the last one that Diego painted, but it is his most autobiographical. It is the Sunday afternoon at the Alameda Park. El sueño dominical en la Alameda Central. In this mural, Diego would present himself dressed in the same way as when he was admitted to San Carlos. He's holding hands with Frida Kahlo and La Catrina, this figure, this festive figure of death by the great José Guadalupe Posada. Here you see Diego's daughters. Este eres tú, ¿verdad? Guadalupe. He would paint all of the history of Mexico, his family. He would put all the people, and then what they were dreaming. For example, this is a little pickpocket, and he's dreaming of the sandwich that he's going to buy when he sells this expensive handkerchief. Then you have the old Chinaco dreaming of Benito Juárez and the reform laws. This mural created a great scandal because here Diego had written the quote of El Nigromante, Dios no existe, God does not exist. Eventually he agreed to remove the phrase and substitute it where the place that the phrase had been given. But it is a mural in which he presents the dreamers, he presents the wealthy and the prostitute, El General Medallas, dreaming that of Porfirio Díaz, the young man that is dreaming of revolutionary revenge, the law student that is dreaming of becoming a corrupt politician. Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, the beautiful Jew persecuted by the Inquisition, the first ride in balloon in Mexico, everything and everyone together. When looking at a mural like this, it is as if there were no boundaries between one man's life and that of his country, and no boundaries between history and dreams. It is as if everything came together in an instant. When looking at a masterpiece like this, I am reminded of the phrase of Mexico's great poet Carlos Pellicer, que una vez afirmó que cuando el hombre pinta en muros de hace 1000 años, como en Bonampak, o cuando se presenta tempestuoso en los cielos terrenales, como Orozco, o cuando cuenta como genio la historia, como Diego Rivera, una fe volcánica en el espíritu humano sacude la historia. When people paint walls thousands of years old, like in Bonampak, or when they present themselves tempestuously in the skies of the earth, as in the works of José Clemente Orozco, or when they tell history as a genius like Diego Rivera, a volcanic faith in the human spirit shapes history. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.